The couple went on their honeymoon for the first time, but due to losing their direction they drifted at sea for a month. Just when they were almost in despair, the husband suddenly noticed a small island not far ahead. The two of them were overjoyed. They immediately drove the dinghy planning to explore the island. However, when they landed they discovered that the huge island was completely deserted with no one around. In their despair, the two suddenly found an abandoned base on the island, but since the place had been abandoned for so long, there was nothing left inside that could help them. With no other option, they decided to return to the boat, hoping to continue their journey and possibly encounter a passing ship, but fate had other plans. That moment the wife was terrified to see clouds suddenly forming above the sailboat accompanied by lightning and thunder. This meant that a massive storm was about to hit. Without time to think, the two hurriedly dragged the dinghy into the water, intending to return to the boat to shelter from the rain. However, what they did not expect was strong winds before the storm made it impossible for the dinghy to move forward. After struggling several times without success, the two were left with no choice but to take refuge in the abandoned base for the night. They would leave once the rain stopped. Fortunately, the husband always carried a lighter, which allowed them to make a fire to keep warm on the cold night. The next day, when the rain stopped, the couple planned to leave quickly, but when they reached the shore they found that the sailboat they had left behind had vanished without a trace. This shocked them. They had clearly dropped the heavy anchor, so how could the sailboat suddenly disappear? Without time to think, the two hurriedly drove the dinghy hoping to find the sailboat. But at that moment the husband suddenly turned off the engine, because he knew that with just their dinghy they could never find the sailboat. Since that was the case, it was better to save some fuel. He then picked up the oars, planning to check the other side of the island. However, the two suddenly discovered that the island was home to countless penguins, since penguins live in the southern hemisphere. So from this they concluded that the island was not far from Antarctica. Soon the man climbed to the top of the mountain, because he wanted to stand at the highest point and search for the sailboat. But what was despairing was that, aside from the endless sea in this island, there was nothing else to be seen. They had no choice but to return to the base and stay there temporarily, praying that a passing ship would notice them. Surprisingly, not only were there some shellfish on the island to fill their stomachs, but there was also plenty of fresh water to quench their thirst. The two were finally able to stop whiling about food for a while. Then they took apart some of the wooden planks from the camp, and with their tacit cooperation, Lee spelled out a distress signal on the mountaintop. This way, if an airplane flew overhead, they would be able to spot them trapped here. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. After surviving on shellfish for so long, the two's bodies began to show signs of abnormality. They were in urgent need of some fat to maintain their bodily functions. For survival, they had no choice but to turn their attention to the penguins on the island. The wife covered her eyes, unwilling to look directly, but when it came time for dinner, she ate even more eagerly than her husband. One day, a month later, the husband suddenly heard his wife shouting loudly outside. It turned out that she had spotted a cruise ship on the sea. This was the closest they had come to being rescued in the past month. Without thinking, the husband hurriedly dragged the dinghy into the water, and then put the engine on full power heading towards the cruise ship. But what was despairing was that, before he could even get halfway there, he discovered that the dinghy had run out of fuel. At that point, he was already quite a distance from the island. In an instant, he fell into despair. When the next day arrived, the wife could still not see her husband's